Very nice. Deputy chief are on the thing, and I'm like,
Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everybody today for coming. I'm Bill Nemser, the planning director here at Maynard and professional development officer for the American Planning Association. And at this time, I've asked the chair of our select board, Mike Stevens, to say a few words to welcome you all to Maynard. But we'd like to thank you all for coming today and making the difficult trek out here. I hope it works out well for you. Mike?
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Maynard. Thank you for coming to enjoy our library here. One of the things that gives me pleasure on this particular event is the realization that not many people are actually from Maynard. So it's a welcoming people from some of our surrounding towns and working with those towns on common problems is just great to see. So this afternoon, just to make sure you come to the right place for municipal requirements and factors for siting and permitting clean energy and battery energy storage systems. And we have, well, I guess who's coming up first?
I'm first.
Okay, but Phil is going to introduce the speakers. Again, just a welcome to me. Thank you for being here. Look forward to the presentations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to just read a little bio of all our speakers, and then we'll start with Steve and Mino from DOER. Stephen is the Clean Energy Siting and Permitting Regional Coordinator for the Central Region of DOER. That is even longer than the name of this one. Oh, Stephen was good today. He's going to discuss about the new local permitting process for clean energy projects, which is kind of what we wanted to have everybody have an opportunity to ask some questions and hash through all this stuff because it's coming up real quick. So Stephen's going to discuss that. From the Environmental League of Massachusetts, we have Aaron Smith and Katrina Delaney, who Katrina is the offshore wind campaign manager for the league, and Aaron is a clean grid director. And they're going to talk about a little bit about what municipal staff in particular should consider with battery energy storage systems, also known as BESS, and the consolidated site permitting reforms that are coming up. And they're also going to discuss, which I thought would be really important, community concerns and how to deal with your communities and typical questions that you get. And so we have informed answers, hopefully reflect the latest information. And last but certainly not least is Jeremy Koo, who's hiding somewhere. He was here.
I'm here.
Oh, there he is. And Jeremy is the Assistant Director for Clean Energy at MAPC. He's also working on a project with Maynard right now. And Jeremy's going to talk about the new regulations and talk about regulatory compliance. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stephen. And all yours, Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Mino. As Bill said, I'm with the Department of Energy Resources. I agree. My whole career has just been extremely long titles, and so I'm working on it. But I am the Clean Energy Siting and Permitting Regional Coordinator. It's great to meet many of you who I've met on Zoom and just come here today. Before I begin, I just want to extend a thank you to Bill for organizing this, MAPC, the town of Maynard, and all of you for taking time out of your day to actually come and attend this in person. And thank you to the Mass Planners Association as well for helping to sponsor this event. So make sure you get your AICP credits. Just as a little bit of background about me, I am a planner by trade. I've worked primarily in New Hampshire and Massachusetts for the past 10 years on a whole host of land use, economic development projects. And I've had the luck of working at every level of government, local, regional, state, and federal. But the Magic region, sub-region is definitely a special place in my heart. I used to be on the board of Freedom's White National Heritage Area. So I thank you for all the work you guys are doing. And the way this is gonna work is I'll present for about 40 minutes. We'll have about 20 minutes of Q&A. And then I'm gonna turn it over to the folks from ELM and they'll speak as well. And then we, if time permits, we'll have a joint Q&A at the end. So just wanted to flag that. And will this advance? There we go. So begin, so, why are we here talking about clean energy? Why has there been such a focus of this from the legislature? As many of you are aware, demand for energy is rising. It was flat for many years, and now we're really seeing more need for it because of, the increase in economic development that's happening, the new technologies that are coming out. And so what are different ways that we can address this demand? And one of them is through building clean energy, which is relatively faster to build and, can provide a more cost-effective energy. Clean energy also provides a lot of benefits to residents and communities. We can see that it is healthier to the air without any emissions. It provides local jobs and economic development, but it also helps make our grid more resilient, more reliable, and more affordable. It avoids us having to use, dirty, expensive peaker plants. It provides us diversity of energy sources. And as you can see, the legislature has really focused on this as a topic going back to 2008 with, many different laws that they've passed. The one that I'm going to primarily be focusing on discussing today is the 2004 Climate Act, which was signed in November 2024. To give you a little bit of background, though, in 2023, the governor formed a commission to look at the Commonwealth's net zero emissions goals and how well the state was doing in reaching them by the date of 2050. And the commission, which I know members from Acton served on, and it was made up of different municipal representatives, environmental groups, energy groups, the utilities, labor groups, and state entities. And they really identified three separate big barriers for the Commonwealth meeting its goals. The first is interconnection, getting these projects actually onto the grid, which I won't focus on today, but a lot of work is being done to address that issue. Another one is growing costs, which we at DOER try to address through our SMART incentive program and through other different funding mechanisms. And then the third bucket that the commission identified was local and state permitting, and just how some of these projects have encountered long permitting times. Some communities were receiving incomplete applications. Some communities felt they didn't have the technical expertise or the resources to adequately review and issue decisions on these projects. And there was also lots of complaints about, the lack of public engagement around these projects, that they were getting really far in the permitting process, and then only abutters were becoming aware of them, and how there weren't consistent review standards throughout the Commonwealth. So that led to the passage of the 2024 Climate Act. My boss likes to call this the biggest local permitting reform in a generation. That might be overstating the case, but it made it onto the slide. But basically, what this means at the local level is it creates a new optional consolidated permitting pathway. And I'll spend the rest of the presentation going over what that means and how it affects you and what you may have to do. I also forgot to mention, I did put handouts over there on that table. I made about 30, because there's 3 different kinds. Made about 30 of them. If we run out, I have business cards. Feel free to email me, and I can also
send everything out.
Okay, perfect. And they are also on all the handouts are on our website as well. And basically, one of the things that came out of this is that municipalities must offer this consolidated permitting pathway as an option for developers. So it is optional for the developers to elect into this consolidated permitting pathway, but it is required for municipalities to offer it. And what that means is if a project undergoes this consolidated local permitting pathway, the municipality has a year to issue a decision on the project. And what it also means is that under these projects, the normal appeals pathways that you would go through for a special permit, Conservation Commission order of conditions, do not apply, and the project can only be appealed to the state's Energy Facility Siting Board. With this process, there also comes, I guess you would call it like the sticks that go with it. So their developers are also required to do something called a site suitability analysis, which I'll go a little more in depth on, as well as increased community engagement protocols. Another change that I should note for the that you should be aware of for the climate law is that they did change the permitting authorities around clean energy projects. So then they grouped them into two classifications. So small clean energy infrastructure facilities are still permitted at the municipal level. And these are generation projects that are under 25 megawatts. Generation under this law includes solar, wind, and anaerobic digestion facilities. So, the legislation refers to them as small, but if any of you have encountered a 24 megawatt solar farm, those can be up to 125 acres. So they're still large, still impactful. Battery storage projects under 100 megawatt hours are also still at the municipal level to permit, and small transmission and distribution projects. Anything above those thresholds will now be permitted through the state's Energy Facility Siting Board. What I'm just giving you, this is a room full of planners, so you already may be aware of these types of projects, but for a lot of people, they hear 25 megawatts and they have no idea what that actually means. What does that mean in terms of acreage, impact size? So the next set of slides is just to give you an idea of what are we talking about? What do these projects look like? So, and these are all going to be what the legislation classifies as those small clean energy infrastructure facilities. So at the very small end of it, we see here a 20 kilowatt ground mounted solar. This is primarily what you might see as, supporting a municipal building, taking up a very small square footage, about 1,400 square feet. But then as we get a little bit bigger, we see here what is about a megawatt project out in Pittsfield, which is taking up about 2.5 acres. And then on the higher end, here is where we see a 20 megawatt commercial ground mounted solar system. This one is in Pennsylvania and is taking up about 50 acres. So, sometimes a good rule of thumb for these solar farms is that it's about, depending on the technology, the site conditions, but it could be about 2 to 5 acres per megawatt for solar farms. When we think about these commercial battery storage units, so here's a 1 megawatt hour system, and this one's taking up about 1/10 of an acre, and which is also a pretty good rule of thumb for you to think about the sizing of them. And then when we get to these larger ones, so this one's about 40 megawatt hours, this one's out in Provincetown, this one's taking up about 0.75 acres. And because this process is referred to as the consolidated local permitting process, people hear that and their minds go to 40B comprehensive permits. So this slide here is really to kind of show that it's not really like 40B, and I'm not a 40B expert, so if I don't get all the nuances correct, be sure to correct me, but this is where I'll go in under the differences, but 40B, as everyone in this room knows, is about affordable housing. Our process with the consolidated local permits about clean energy. With 40B, the ZBA becomes the permitting authority, but under this process, local boards still retain their individual permitting authority, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later on. 40B also has municipal exemptions if 10% of your year-round housing stock is classified as affordable. Under the consolidated local permitting process, there is no threshold for exemption, so all communities must offer this. I know 40B allows provisions to override local zoning bylaws, but under this process, there really it does not override your local zoning bylaws. The appeals pathway is obviously different, whereas 40B goes to the Housing Appeals Committee, where for this process, it's going to the EFSB through what I'll go in a little bit more detail on, called the de novo adjudication process. So in a nutshell, this is the consolidated local permitting process. I have a slide on each of these bubbles and phases, but to give you an idea, what happens is before the applicant even files an application with the municipality, they have to undergo something called pre-filing, which is focuses on doing increased community engagement. They then submit the application to the municipality where the permitting review begins, where the individual permits that this project might need based on your local bylaws and regulations. I did not know. That is not enough of a lift, so this is gonna go up there. I apologize. And I guess it will be a little plug for the lottery commission where I got this water bottle. From Connect 351, but so the permitting review, so based on the project site conditions, your local bylaws, if the project needs special permit, if it needs site plan approval, if it needs an order of conditions, if it needs a scenic road permit, whatever those might be, they have to get from those boards who have those authorities to issue them. And then essentially those respective individual decisions are collected together. I like to think of it as like a cover letter almost, that and are bundled together under this consolidated permitting process. And so once all those individual board decisions are issued, that's when the decision is issued. And the decision then can be appealed to the EFSB through a de novo adjudication process. If any single board does not issue a decision, a constructive approval would go into effect, and the project would be allowed to go forward. I will also note the legislature does include a carve out where if upon receipt of the application, the municipality feels they do not have either the technical expertise, the resources to review this project, they can refer to the EFSB to take over as the permitting authority. I think, that process is open to anyone, but I think is more meant for very small communities without any professional staff. So now I'll walk you through the stages of this process. We'll start with pre-filing. And the idea behind this phase is to ensure that developers are putting up a good faith effort to submit more complete applications and do outreach to the community earlier on in this process. So a few requirements during this pre-filing phase include they are required to meet with local officials. So that and that just will depend on what your local community is made of, your different staff. But at this meeting with the municipal representatives, they have to discuss who local stakeholders might be that they want to notice at this public meeting that they're required to have, confirm all the needed individual permits for the project, discuss any major issues, things that will probably be, that should be flagged, check plan accuracy, and at this meeting, and have a discussion around what might be the best way to notice people of this public information session, where might be a good location to have it. And so the developer is then required to host a public information session in the community in which the project is taking place. They are required to notice through several ways. The first is they have to send out mailers to butters, as well as this group called local stakeholders, which include like community-based organizations, neighborhood associations. They are required to post notices about it in at least 2 community facilities in the town. They are also required to notice it through 2 different multimedia outlets. So that could be a newspaper ad, it could be a Facebook post or a Facebook ad in local groups. It could be a TV ad, radio ad, whatever will best meet kind of, the groups that you're trying to notice. And also putting information on a project website. At this public information session, the developer is required to discuss something called the site suitability analysis, which I'll go through, the overview of the project, the impacts they have on the project will have, any anticipated kind of community benefits that they're thinking of offering, any needed minimization or mitigation they need to provide, as well as preliminary emergency response protocols. During this presentation, they are required to do a Q&A and receive feedback from everyone at the meeting. And then at the end of this meeting, they have to compile all how they did the noticing, the feedback they received, and those other associated materials. There's a form that we have put out that's essentially a checklist, making sure that they have met this, that then needs to be signed by the municipality. And then once they get that signature, the applicant will have 60 days to submit that application to the municipality. So I made references to the site suitability concept. So this came out of the climate law. And the idea behind it is for these projects that are going through this 12-month timeframe, which might be an accelerated timeframe for some communities, we want to ensure that they're being cited in less impactful, more appropriate or suitable locations for clean energy infrastructure. And so it is a mapping tool that is now available. It was developed by the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs, or Energy and Environmental Affairs, but EA. And there are 5 criteria in which that go into the site suitability score. They include climate resiliency, carbon sequestration, agricultural resources, biodiversity, and social and environmental burden. So the applicant or anyone can upload the coordinates of the project or draw it as a polygon, and that will produce the score with the underlying scores for each category. Works kind of like a golf score. The lower the score is, the less impact you have, and the more suitable the site is considered. You'll see here all the scores are on a 0 to 5 scale, except for the climate resiliency one. And there are some weights built into the system. So if it's a pre-developed site, like a parking lot, it automatically gets a 0 for certain criteria. If it's protected open space, it automatically will get a 5. So that is to ensure that, or to incentivize these projects to site themselves on pre-developed spaces rather than, cutting down a lot of forest land to then build solar arrays. There are certain class of these projects that are exempt from doing site suitability and pre-filing. These are very small projects, like very small on the small end of these clean energy infrastructure projects. So these are sites that are an acre or less of generation, solar canopy, so going on a parking lot, behind the meter uses primarily, and transmission and distribution projects that are already in existing rights of way. This just gives you an idea of what the site suitability scoring tool looks like. But what you would do is, like I mentioned, you would draw the polygon or you would upload the coordinates of the project, and that will give you your score. As you can see here, this is a site, and this is like a made-up site. It's not a real project, but it shows that it is, in a site with high biodiversity scores based on the biomap. It's in biomap core habitat, and so may not be the most suitable site for clean energy infrastructure. With that, based on these site suitability scores, the developers are required to do appropriate minimization and mitigation. And so EA has put out a guideline that discusses that, and we are also developing a guideline as well that speaks more in depth to this process. But the idea is, if the site is going to have an impact and we start approaching scores of 3 and above, the developer has to do things that are above and beyond what would already be required by your site plan protocols or by, say, the Wetlands Act. And so our guideline that we're putting out is a list of some of those potential measures, and thinking about what would be appropriate for the site. But it is up to the municipality. So the developer has to propose measures as part of their application. It is up to the municipality and this role called the local government representative that I'll discuss a little bit later on to assess those measures and either agree to them or propose additional measures. And then anything that would be proposed would be included as a condition of this consolidated local permit. So the idea behind this consolidated local permit application, which on our website, we do have a version of the form that is available. We are also developing a permitting portal that municipalities are not required to use, but is available to you as a resource. Applicants are going to be required to use it to report on these projects, so we at the state can make sure we're tracking them and know what's going on with each of them. But the idea is that the developer has to provide all the materials, not only that are required as part of the Climate Act, but are required based on your individual bylaws for all those individual permits. And once you receive the application, you will have 30 days to review it and make sure they have provided all the appropriate materials. They have paid all your fees. So we do not set any additional fees for this process. The fees would essentially be all those individual permit fees added together. But you are also able to set your own permit fees for this process as well. And once you receive the application, you have 30 days in which to issue a completeness determination, where you can say, the stormwater management plan is missing, here's another 30 days to cure that deficiency. But once the municipality deems the application complete, that is what starts the 12-month time clock for the municipality to issue a decision. As I mentioned at this stage as well, the municipality could also opt in to refer the project to the EFSB. So, our regulations are pretty turnkey. They do not require the municipality to adopt a bylaw in order to do this process. But the way to think about it is legally one decision. All those individual permit decisions from those boards are bundled together as part of this consolidated local permit decision. And the real big changes around that again are this 12-month time frame and this appeal to the EFSB. I should also mention ministerial permits are not included as part of this process. So a building permit, a street opening permit, an electrical permit do not fall in this 12-month time frame. We're really talking about these discretionary permits from adjudicatory boards. As part of this process, we at the state were required to develop a series of baseline health, safety, and environmental standards. So we have issued a guideline that basically compiles and makes reference a lot of applicable state standards and puts on a lot of guidelines around and baseline standards around a wide variety of topics related to emergency response, monitoring, nuisances, decommissioning, erosion, and so forth. The standards do address kind of all the different phases of the project related to construction, operation maintenance, decommissioning. As I mentioned, it references a lot of other applicable state standards such as the Wetlands Protection Act, a lot of DEP rules. Municipalities are not prohibited from adopting additional standards, likely you already do through your zoning code. Obviously, though, it is what will need to be approved by, the municipal law unit, the AG's office. And I do also, the EFSB does also have zoning exemption authority if one of your projects did get to the EFSB either through referral or through de novo adjudication, to grant zoning exemption as well. They've had that authority under 40A since I think the 80s. So as I mentioned, if a single board does not issue a decision, the project would receive something called constructive approval and it would allow to go forward. With that, we at the state have developed a series of common conditions that are essentially guardrails to ensure the project is still built in, with consideration to environmental safety, and so forth. So we have released this guideline on common conditions. They, again, cover kind of the life cycle of the project from, administrative and legal conditions, requirements for construction, operation, maintenance, decommission, and these are requirements that would be enforced by the local government. I didn't mention this, but I should as well. The way the decision works for this project, since you have these individual boards issuing their own decisions, it's an all or nothing permit. So if any single board issues a denial, the entire consolidated permit is denied. So it's the same with constructive approval. If any single board does not issue a decision, then the constructive approval goes into effect. In order for the applicant to get an approval for this project, it's either through the constructive approval method or it's all boards issuing an approval. In creating this process, we recognize that there needed to be a point person or point people or point entities at the municipal level to help facilitate the entire process or segments of the process. And our regulations refer to this as the local government representative. So there is a handout over there specifically on the local government representative. Because every community is different, we're dealing with 351 cities and towns with different government structures, different staff capacities. The recommendation we got from the MMA was to designate this person by default as the chief administrative officer of each municipality. So depending on your charter, that may be the mayor, maybe the select board, maybe the town administrator. And then that person has the authority to designate all the roles and responsibilities of this, or different roles to different people or entities. And that way, it gives you the flexibility on what makes sense in your community. So the first three responsibilities are pretty administrative. They are certifying that the pre-final activities have been completed, that the application is complete, and to issue the decision on the consolidated permit. So those are all forms that are on our website that that this person would fill out and sign and attach as part of these permits. The fourth one is much more discretionary. So this, may be something that you would assign a person, but you could also designate it to a board. And that is reviewing the minimization and mitigation measures for the site suitability assessments, and determining if they're appropriate or if that entity wants to assign additional minimization or mitigation measures. So we've listed some potential designees. I think in a lot of communities it's going to be town planners. It's but many communities don't have this role, so it might be the building commissioner, it might be a chair of a board who ends up with some of these responsibilities. So that brings me to, what do you think about, what do you need to do? Coming here is a great first step, but we have issued a lot of different materials. Our regulations are out. Most of our guidelines have been published. So just getting familiar with those. We have FAQs over there as well. So we have a lot of different resources on our website. That we are offering as technical assistance resources. So just having a baseline familiarity with this process. The other part of it is our regulations allow communities to begin offering this process July 1st of this year through September 30th. You are under no obligation to start offering this process earlier. I don't think there will be that many communities who will, but that is available to you. But starting October 1st, you must begin offering this process. And then the last thing to think about is, decide or begin thinking about and talking with your town administrator or your select board, who would be the most appropriate person or entity for the local government representative. So as I mentioned, we are putting out a lot of materials and we're continuing to put out more resources to support municipalities through this. So our final regulations are up on our website. But we also have guidelines around pre-filing, the common conditions, the standards, and we will soon be publishing guidelines on the minimization and mitigation measures as well as the application. We also did develop a model permitting bylaw, so this is not required for municipalities to adopt, but it is just another resource if it would be easier for the municipality to adopt this consolidated permitting process by reference into their bylaws. And it does allow some tweaks. It's another way you can designate the local government representative, and it allows, some, other provisions if there's parts of it that you want to specify. The last thing is, as I mentioned, our role as regional coordinators is really to provide technical assistance. So we're developing a lookbook so you can have kind of a resource to bring out to your communities so they understand, the scale and size of these projects. We have been doing, kind of a roadshow of this presentation with all the RPAs throughout the state. So again, thank you to NAPC and the Magic Subregion for hosting us here today. But we as regional coordinators are available to answer any questions or come out to your communities if you want to have an individual meeting with your town staff or with any of your boards. I also do want to just do a plug because I know Aaron and Katrina are going to be talking more in depth about this, but we do have access to this free training on BESS and solar safety. So feel free, and I know Bill's going to circulate this PowerPoint, but if you go to that QR code and you enter the MassEC2 user code, you get free access to this training course. So and you feel free to circulate this if you want to send it to your fire chief or any other emergency response providers as well. Here is our team, as I mentioned before. So, for the Magic subregion, I really cover like the western half, starting with like Acton, Maynard, moving out to Littleton, but and the eastern half of this region is covered by my colleague Marcela Castillo, who is our Northeast Regional Coordinator. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it here today, but this gives you an idea too. We also have, if anyone here is from our Southeast region, Connor Rocket is our Regional Coordinator there, and Doug Finn, who just started last week, is our Western Regional Coordinator. So we overlap the same territories with our Green Communities Division. So if Kelly Brown is your contact, that's me, I'm her counterpart, and so forth. And that QR code will bring you to our website where you'll find a lot more information and all of the resources that I mentioned. So I know I just ran through that pretty quickly and threw a lot of information at you, and I'm sure you have lots of questions. So, but thank you so much. Yeah. Why don't we do like 15 minutes of questions? Yeah, and then we'll turn it over to Aaron at what time is it now? 3? Yeah. Yeah.
The appeal to the state board, is that just for applicants who have their local permits denied, or is that for abutters who are upset that the local courts approve of that?
It could be any of those. So the regulations state that it has to be someone who, and I'm gonna specifically and substantially impacted by the decision of the project. So that could be a local stakeholder, it could be an abutter, it could be the applicant themselves if they don't agree with a condition, for example.
Steve, can you repeat the question going forward?
Oh, sure. So that question was who has the right to appeal or to the EFSB or request an appeal? Yeah.
Speaking of the appeals to the EFSB, how long would that approximately take by the EFSB?
Yeah, so the de novo adjudication process goes to the director of the EFSB, and they have 6 months in which to issue a decision on that. Yeah, Christine.
More appeals questions. So if the project is denied by a board under a statute that has another set of appellate processes, how does that comport with this? With the applicant and or the abutters, depending what the decision is, still have the ability to exercise those appellate rights?
not through those other means. So the climate law, if the developer takes this consolidated permitting pathway, all those individual appeals pathways for those individual permits do not apply
They
anymore.
do not apply.
It only goes to the State's Energy Facility Setting Board.
Okay, but if a board, okay, so so they would still have to appeal a local board's decision to the Energy Siting Board, not to Land Court or Superior Court.
Correct.
Okay.
It goes, the way the climate law wrote this is it has to be the decision, the consolidated permit
Okay.
decision that goes to the EFSB. So say, just for example, a project comes in and the Conservation Commission denies it, and they still need site plan approval. The applicant can't immediately go to the EFSB. They have to wait for the decision from all the applicable boards, and only then can they go to the EFSB. From the EFSB, it then goes to the SJC.
Got it.
In the instance where a singular local board denies, but all of the other boards approve, and the consolidated permit is appealed, is it only the denial that's reviewed, or is it all of the decisions?
Great question. I'll try to keep remembering to repeat the question for everyone. Yeah. So the question is it a single permit that is reviewed that the denial is based on, or is it the entire permit? So de novo means, like, I'm not a lawyer, so I was just talking about this earlier. I sometimes regret not going to law school, but so de novo means from a fresh look. So they are technically not, so the EFSB, while they will look at all the materials that, were part of the issuance of the denial and, the approvals, they are essentially giving a fresh look on the entire permit. Yeah, I'll go with the person in the tan shirt just as you already asked the question.
During pre-siting, so the mention of the developer owns a project website. That I assume would be linked to a municipal website, which could be sort of pushed to that project owned website, or?
It could be either. We give a lot of discretion on that.
And the question is, how long, what's the duration? Is that through that 1 year process? Is that through sort of
It's a great question. Our regulations kind of only address it through the lifespan of the permitting of it. That is a good question we could clarify. I don't think we have any requirements that they keep the website up after it's, commissioned and being built, but that is something that's a piece of feedback I'll take back to the team so we can clarify that. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I think it was one of your first slides, just kind of the difference between a small versus a large. If it meets kind of, is it as soon as it's a large, if it meets one of those criteria, does it have to meet all of those, or kind of what is that?
So yeah, it's a good question. So the question is, if it meets, does the project have to meet just one of the criteria to be considered large, or does it, at what point? So if we had, say, a 20 megawatt solar farm with, 101 megawatt hour battery, that would be considered a large project. So as soon as any single component of the project hits the large threshold, it goes to the EFSB. Okay. Yeah.
How long are the consolidated permits valid for? And has the state taken into consideration the potential for a project being approved where the infrastructure can't support it? Like, how do you identify that the second question during the review process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the climate law did not override or create any changes to like lapse periods for those individual permits. So so I know so for like a variance, it's like 6 months, but for this process is like is your question, once this decision's issued, like how good is the decision for?
Yeah. Yes.
So it would be, essentially it would be what those individual permits, the statutory requirements that allow for those different
They're all
individual
different.
permits. Yeah. Yeah.
A special permit is 3 years, a
Yeah.
variance is 1 year. I
Yeah.
know there's been some changes to that,
Yeah.
but and a
Yeah.
wetlands permit it's
So
3.
how do they go from being all one permit for the issuance to then having individual piecemeal sunset clauses?
It's a great question. So the only thing I can say is if, say, it lapses and like they need to get one of those individual permits again, they don't necessarily have to go back and do the consolidated permit again. They could go back and just get that individual permit. Or vice versa, they also are in theory able to get an individual permit, a single one, and then do the remaining through the consolidated process. So I agree.
If they still have to go back.
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely, it is something the legislature did not include as a provision, so it's definitely gonna
They
be
didn't have us
messy.
at the table
Yeah.
helping them with, that's why.
But it's a great question. And I know you, oh, sorry, did you have a
What
follow-up?
about this, and then, I think that discussion was good, I think it would, if the state went through the process of coming up with the consolidated permit legislation, I don't know if there's an opportunity to potentially assign language so that you choose the longest permit in the process versus the shortest, but or assign a certain number of years.
Yeah.
But my second question was identify, like, where in this review process is the infrastructure portion reviewed, right? So the community has all of its permitting processes, they have something in place that goes through the consolidated review. How do you avoid permitting something that the utility then says, it's gonna be 5 years until we have either a substation or something else that is needed to support the application? Where is the utility review in the process?
It's a great question. I mean, unless your regulations speak to that, we do not, that is not included as part of this.
Or if you have a local municipal utility, that helps.
Yeah.
In this instance.
For sure. Yes, all right.
Say the developer gets all the local approvals, but EFSB or the developer has an issue with one of the conditions, does it get remanded back to the local board, or does EFSB have the authority to just strike?
So just to make sure I'm understanding the scenario, you're talking about a situation where the project is approved, but there is a condition that the developer disagrees with. So they appeal to the EFSB, and would the EFSB remand it back to the board to reconsider the condition, or would they just issue their own decision? The EFSB would issue their own decision. They wouldn't remand back. Any last? Yeah.
Did you say the town's chief admin officer would issue the constructive approval if there's no 12-month decision?
It is, yeah, so it is the local government representative who by default is. Oh, I already passed it, didn't I? I don't know why I'm looking there when I'm right here, but yes, so it is the local government representative who is responsible for issuing the decision, which is essentially, it is a form that we have where they compile all the individual board decisions, all the individual conditions, and they basically check off, you know, this board approved the conditions, this board denied, or this board did not issue a decision, and then therefore the project is constructively approved. Yeah, so yes.
So I'm just curious, like, if there was a proposal for a solar array that was violating a local wetlands protection bylaw, like, and the Conservation Commission would then confirm it, to what extent would the EFSB be considering local jurisdiction?
That's a great question. So I do believe they take into account all the local rules and regulations because they're doing that de novo review. So they are seeing how well the project adhered to local bylaws and state regulations as well. Yeah.
I might add, just like, that's part of why I think the intent is like, even if one of those boards has already made a denial, like they, like the law contemplates that like every other board still needs to do its process so that that's all part of the evidentiary record that gets submitted to EFSB. Like even though they're doing it de novo, they still want to see what was part of the consolidated application process. And it's like there's some language in the statute about like lending substantial weight to the decision of the the perspective of the local government.
Then I know you had a question, right? Oh.
So can a small project opt to have its application reviewed by EFSB, or are they only allowed to go through a consolidated municipal permit process?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, do you mean can a small community refer any solar project or any battery to the EFSB? They can only refer projects that have come to them as a consolidated local project to the EFSB.
I mean, for a small production or small storage project, may that applicant go directly to the EFSB?
The only scenario in which the applicant can go directly to the EFSB for a small clean energy facility project is if it's a transmission and distribution project.
Just to be clear though, like the consolidated permit pathway is an option that the developer can opt into. I know there are a variety of bylaws and whatnot across our towns that will say like, we should, for ground mounted solar projects, we will issue a decision within 6 months or 8 months. So, why would the developer be like, well, why don't I just use that process? So like, if again, like it's sort of like, if you're choosing a process that has this specific wrapper and a set of processes around it, around the existing permitting boards and authorities, if the applicant wanted to go to each of those individually, through what would happen today under your current process, they are still able to do that.
That's the last question, then I'll turn it over.
So just very basic. So I assume for a large scale development, the developer has to buy some land, and then I assume that the utility will give them a piece of the action from generated electricity. Is that the incentive for the developer?
I mean, the incentive for the developer, a lot of these developers build these projects and then end up selling them to someone who makes it. The utilities are not in the part of generating the energy, so these are all typically private companies who will be coming forward with these projects. But the incentives for them to build it are, for storage, they can sell the energy back into the grid. There are also state incentives through our smart solar project as well for them to build it as well. All right, I'm over time. So I want to thank you all again. I'm sure you have more questions. So if any of you feel free, come get me. I also have business cards as well. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, I just want to say something briefly. You didn't catch into it. I'm Jeremy Cohn, the Assistant Director of the Clean Energy Department at MAPC. We're really grateful to be working with DOER on this. We've been pretty involved. You may have seen me on a previous Magic meeting talking about this, or like trying to get input on like our public comments into the draft regs last fall. We're really happy to have been working with DOER on this. This is the 5th of the 5 sub-regional workshops that we've been having across our region. We are also very grateful to DOER for now also providing us with funding so that we can offer additional technical assistance beyond what is being offered through the regional coordinator. So that will be in one piece of it is to sort of supplement how Stephen and the other regional coordinators are supporting with you on compliance with these regulations, but also we recognize that particularly around battery energy storage, the landscape around zoning bylaws and sort of what your local regulations are sort of like it's a little bit fuzzier. It's an emerging technology, and not everybody has something on the books. So part of that technical assistance also is you can request support with developing zoning bylaw amendments for battery energy storage or revisiting your existing solar PV zoning bylaws. That information will be the sign form is going live tomorrow when it goes out with our newsletter, and it will also come through the sub-regional coordinators. So stay tuned. You can sign up through that, or email us at ceisiting@mapc.org if you have any questions about that.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Smith. I'm the Energy and Grid Policy Director at the Environmental League of Massachusetts, or ELM. You'll see that acronym on the slide.
Yep. And I'm Katrina. I am the Offshore Wind Campaign Manager for ELM.
Excited to talk about battery energy storage systems and key considerations for thinking about them as planners today. So just a brief bit of background. The Environmental League of Massachusetts, we're one of the oldest environmental advocacy organizations in the state. We were founded in 1896, so we've been around quite a while. You can see some of our priority issue areas right there. We work to advance a host of environmental sustainability priorities, and today, as you see there on the top left, we're talking about clean energy. So yeah, brief bit of background about me. I've been in the energy industry for about 10 years. Been in Massachusetts for about 7, kind of came here to do my master's degree in energy economics at MIT, and just been sticking around the clean energy landscape here ever since.
Yeah, so I came to campaign work a little bit non-traditionally, was a special educator for about a decade in DC, and then helped out with political campaigns in my own hometown, Pembroke, and then ended up working with ELM and getting into
Checks us to what we're going to talk about today in terms of clean energy constructions for planners. So you can see a brief overview there, but we'll touch a bit on the 2024 climate law that Stephen mentioned, and then get into some of the key questions that we've been hearing and doing some of our community engagement work in communities around Massachusetts, in towns where battery storage has been proposed or cited. So first, sort of why are we here in terms of clean energy? So for about 25 years, Massachusetts has been prioritizing clean energy and the development of renewables with our first renewable portfolio standard back in 2003. And increasingly, the state is working to incentivize the deployment of battery energy storage systems. So in addition to that renewable energy. So like Stephen talked about, in 2024, we passed a big climate law that, among other things, requires the procurement of 5 gigawatts of battery energy storage by 2030. And it also consolidates the siting and permitting of these clean energy projects. In addition to that 2024 climate law, the governor issued an executive order earlier this year that prioritized the development of additional new solar and battery capacity by 2035. So why? I know Stephen touched on these points a little bit as well in his presentation, but in addition to some of the environmental and climate benefits of clean energy is also the fastest and cheapest form of new energy available today. And as we face rising electric bills, it's one of the just cheapest ways to get new energy online. So one of the reasons why you see some of these price graphs here, clean energy is not vulnerable to supply chain disruptions in quite the same way that oil and gas is, that powers a lot of our other electric systems. Solar and wind in particular don't have any fuel costs. The solar and the wind is free. So it's part of why you see some of the cost declines there. And I want to distinguish renewables like solar and wind from things like battery energy storage. Storage helps us get the most out of our clean energy resources for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk more about them in a second. I did want to highlight one piece of data on this graph, and just also important to note that these cost data are unsubsidized costs. So no ITC or PTC, those are incentive tax credits for clean energy. Those aren't reflected here because they're unsubsidized, but I want to point your attention to that red line on the graph that's labeled gas peaker. So typically on our sort of hottest or coldest days here in New England, we call on something called peaker plants, which are gas-fired plants that tend to be really expensive, really inefficient, but they exist for reliability reasons. We don't run them many hours of the year, but they exist because they're capable of ramping up electric production really, really quickly to meet demand when prices and demand spike. So think of a hot summer day when everyone's running their ACs, that's when we call on these peaker plants. I want to mention that to you in particular reference with the storage line here on sort of like that bright blue, because we keep these peaker plants online for reliability, but they cost us a lot of money. Storage, by contrast, can serve a lot of the same functions as gas peaker plants with a fraction of the emissions reductions at a fraction of the price. And so as we work to decarbonize the grid and make sure that we reduce our electric prices, storage serves a really critical role in meeting those demand characteristics. It's also one of the fastest ways to bring new electricity online. So just again, putting a graph here about how long it takes to build clean energy in the United States. And it's important to note that these graphs are US level averages. So you can see solar and batteries listed there are the fastest. And I mentioned that these are averages because here in New England, it takes a lot longer to build any type of energy, just due to siting and permitting challenges in general. So you can, in general, add a year or two to these timelines for here in New England, but that applies to every resource type. And I bring that up because it was the impetus for the 2024 climate law that Stephen mentioned, and it was why ELM as our organization advocated in favor for the bill. But again, just when we talk about energy affordability and clean energy, in addition to cost, speed is also a big factor in play here. So why battery energy storage? So battery storage is really cool and unique in the characteristics it's able to apply relative to other resources. So as you'll see there under the reliable piece, most generators have to supply electricity in real time to meet demand. Battery storage is different. It's able to store electricity when prices are low and demand is low, and inject onto the grid later when prices are high. So that helps keep the lights on, and it also just helps stabilize the grid in general. It is that same characteristic that also helps keep that electric price down and affordable. So again, for the same reason of being able to inject power when the grid is strained and demand is high, it also then shifts that energy from storing energy when it is cheap and shifting it to when it is expensive, then bringing down the costs for everybody. And it's also clean. It has no emissions on its own. And when we look at solar and wind, there are times that those resources inject more energy onto the grid than it can immediately absorb. And that's a bunch of cheap, abundant renewable energy that we can be storing and getting more out of. So again, batteries help us get more out of that renewable energy at other times of day. So I included a few graphs here that illustrate the both reliability benefits on the left and then the affordability benefits on the right of battery storage. So the left image shows something called peak shaving. So imagine again that same very hot day when everyone is running their air conditioners. It takes a lot of electricity to run all of that. And so historically, again, days like that, when you see a kind of peak power in that dotted dark blue line, that's when the demand peaks and we run those expensive, inefficient gas-fired peaker plants that I mentioned. Again, battery storage serves a similar characteristic by being able to inject energy quickly onto the grid, but at a fraction of the cost. So when you look at that little turquoise section, that is meant to represent the power that battery injects on those hottest days or those coldest days when demand is higher. So that turquoise amount reflects the amount of energy that a battery is able to displace those more expensive, higher polluting gas-fired peaker plants. And then when you look at the graph on the right, that just sort of reflects the economics of how that then translates into costs. It's a basic kind of supply and demand dynamic where by injecting more supply of cheaper energy onto the grid, you shift the supply curve out to the right, and then you lower the overall clearing price, and that's the price that we all pay. So again, more reliable, lower costs. So we've talked a lot about energy storage, and we haven't really defined what it is. And so just at a baseline level, it's any system that stores energy for release later. Today, the focus is going to be on battery storage, which comes in various chemistries, sizes, and applications. So lithium ion is the most common technology that exists today, and it's in everything. If you have an iPhone, if you have a laptop, you have a lithium ion battery on you. But again, the focus today is on grid scale applications. And it's also worth highlighting that while it is a relatively newer technology compared to other things like solar and wind, for example, it's been around for over a decade, and you can see in here the map of all sort of larger scale grid scale batteries across the Commonwealth. So it's about 131 projects to date in Massachusetts that are in various stages of development. And again, this kind of just reflects that battery storage, again, is still a little bit newer relative to other industries, but it's also as part of that learning a lot in terms of the sort of technology is improving in terms of energy density and safety. It's also what leads to the cost declines that we're seeing and why the benefits to the grid are related to affordability. And we've also seen the adoption of safety standards in around the 2019 timeframe. So if you can see that graph really started to accelerate around the 2020 timeframe. It's also around the time that we have our modern safety standards that govern these systems. But again, part of the reason we want to focus on battery storage for the presentation today is because these systems are a little bit newer, when they're being installed in some of the communities around our state, some planners are rightly asking questions about safety and how to appropriately site these systems. So the newness is why we focused on it today.
Yeah. So in terms of how these go from policy to practice, we were looking at 5 different dimensions of planning, and different aspects of these are included in the siting and permitting. But this was just a way that we use that information to distill it down into categories. So obviously there's the siting and permitting in terms of regulatory alignment. There's also the aspect of safety in terms of both public health as well as emergency response. The other piece is benefits and environmental justice. And thinking about the value to the host community, as well as community engagement in terms of both education to the public as well as building trust. And the final piece is labor in terms of workforce considerations.
Awesome. Yes, so talking to that first dimension that Katrina mentioned in terms of sort of siting and permitting. So I think this speaks to one of the questions at the tail end of Stephen's presentation, which is sort of the most common question that I think we've heard when engaging in these communities where batteries are located is, why is this project being sited here? And can we move it elsewhere? And I will say, I think that's not unique to battery storage. I think that's common for a lot of projects, but I did want to talk about just sort of some of the dimensions that impact the siting of batteries that maybe don't impact other projects that might be coming to a town. So in particular, I've included a couple of maps here to showcase some of the existing electric infrastructure in Massachusetts, and that top map shows a sort of zoomed in section of downtown Boston. And so battery projects typically locate within 2 to 5 miles of an existing substation or a distribution or transmission line. The reason why is that if they don't locate close to those particular parts of the grid, they have to get a dedicated line that can cost up to about $1 million a mile. In some cases, it can just be quite expensive to get a lot of dedicated lines. And again, when projects are approved, then factors into electric bills as well. So if you look at this line, or this map on the top section, this is sort of a sample map of Eversource's electric capacity map in that section of downtown Boston. And it's a little small in the legend here, but if you see sections in green, that's where there's more capacity on the grid to absorb new energy. The sections in red are where the grid is already pretty full. There's not room to inject more energy onto the grid without causing a voltage violation. And I bring that up because you'll notice some of the green space here, if you've taken a walk down downtown Boston, some of this green space on the map is also actually green space. So that also means that you can't put a battery in a public park. There's also restrictions on where you can site these projects to preserve, rightly, public lands. And so I just bring this up because, again, downtown Boston is a great example of why it's really, really difficult to site a battery. And you can see that reflected here in the map. And this is a dynamic that you'll see across the state in terms of electric hosting capacity. There are, talk to your local utility, you'll be able to kind of see where on the map there is existing grid hosting capacity and where there isn't. I also included here on the bottom a map of all of the electric transmission level substations in Massachusetts, again, sort of to reflect why battery projects choose to site in particular locations. To the answer of the question, can we move this project elsewhere? Sometimes, yes, you can. Sometimes you should deny it. Not all projects are created equal. But I do think there are some difficulties with the electric grid infrastructure that already exists that influence some of those siting decisions. So the battery project comes to your town and is in a particular parcel, asking some of these questions to tease out why and if there's alternative sites that meet those same criteria. It's a key part of the decision. But yeah,
yeah. So with those BESS siting considerations in mind, we're trying to look at this not as, rehashing all the siting and permitting that you just heard about, but really thinking about how do we take those regulations and that framework to be able to go into how we make decisions locally and moving more from theory into practice and how it turns out in our communities. So you want to identify the correct Massachusetts permitting track, which you can see those qualifications there. EFSB does the consolidated review for large BESS storage projects, as well as the local state consolidated permitting for smaller facilities. You want to use those DOER model bylaws and look at EEA fire safety and public health FAQs that they provide, as well as the consolidated permit standards in local findings and special permit conditions. You want to identify the local government representative that was mentioned before. It's the number of people and boards that can be identified for that. And you want to also think about the way that the town planner, obviously, how your role fits into that. For projects that are under local review, you want to require applicants to show consistency with state siting guidance, site suitability expectations, and cumulative impact analysis principles. For larger projects that are under EFSB review, you want to use host community negotiations and advisory roles to make sure local concerns are reflected in the state record.
Yeah, and just wanted to kind of reemphasize the model battery storage bylaw that Stephen and Jeremy mentioned. I think that has a lot of really good content in it, but we also participate in the stakeholder group informing what that looks like. I think that's going to be a really helpful tool to help consider some of the siting and zoning restrictions in siting systems in town. But again, it's optional and more of a kind of starting point. Getting into safety. So the second dimension. So I'm not going to address all of these just in the interest of time, though we can talk about it after. I'll be around for Q&A, but I'll kind of emphasize the kind of two most common questions that we've heard in communities where these projects are located, and rightly so. The first one is, are these systems safe? And the short answer is yes, so long as they are designed in accordance with the latest safety codes and standards and are developed in accordance with local emergency responders to have an emergency response plan. So just in that sort of elaborating on that a little more, I included a graph here from the Electric Power Research Institute. They track all battery storage projects around the world and sort of track both cumulative deployments as well as the incidence of either a fire or other sort of like failure parts of the battery system. And I want to emphasize this graph here because the section in blue, that kind of shaded area, reflects the kind of cumulative deployments since 2018 globally. And that line in red reflects the number of incidents of a fire at a battery storage system in that same time frame. So you can see the number of incidents going down as deployments have gone up. And so looking closer at the data, the incidence and risk of battery fire, because this is, again, one of the more common questions that we hear, is about as likely as a house fire. So I bring that up because the risk is there, but it also is about just to give you some context with the likelihood relative to other sort of more known risks. And so because that risk is still there, that's why you need to develop an emergency response plan in coordination with your local emergency responder, just in case, and make sure that you have a plan in place for if something goes wrong. And then I also want to emphasize that part of the reason why that sort of incident line there, that red line, is going down is because of technology evolution. So the industry, again, it's been around for over a decade, but there's been a real shift from nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistries from some of the earlier iterations of batteries to something called lithium iron phosphate, or LFP. And I highlight that because the energy density and the sort of like temperature at which these batteries can operate is a lot different than the older generation of technologies. That's part of sort of the reason that graph has gone down, is those technologies that are newer, those chemistries are safer and just able to operate at higher operating temperatures. That graph has also gone down because, again, in 2019 to 2020, where you see that biggest kind of this decrease, that was the year that we adopted the sort of National Fire Protection Association, their baseline health and safety standards that govern electric battery storage installations and equipment. So again, this industry, while newer, and I think there have been headlines about like fires out on the West Coast built on older technologies, this is why that graph is going down so sharply in that year. The second most common question we hear on safety is how much water is needed in the event of a failure or a fire. The general recommendation is actually not to use water on a battery storage fire. The general recommended procedure is to use water to kind of extinguish the area around the fire to prevent any sort of spread to neighboring structures or trees, and to sort of just in general kind of like let the fire burn. But again, part of that safety standards that were implemented in 2019 that we talked about requires early monitoring and detection systems so that if there is a failure in one particular cell, it doesn't spread to the rest and create a larger system failure. So again, happy to talk through some of the other questions at a later time, but those are the two kind of most common that we hear.
And one other piece, or you might be able to explain this better, but each cell is encapsulated, so it's usually doesn't spread from one to another.
Yeah, and if you look on the far right here, sort of going to the considerations, these are the list of safety standards and codes. They're UL stands for Underwriting Laboratories, and NFPA is National Fire Protection Association. These are the kind of the three gold standard for governing sort of the equipment. So like, how do we design this particular cell? There's the second one, 9540A, which governs equipment testing. So they literally will light batteries on fire to test how they will respond and make sure that they design them and ensure like particular spacing so that there's less risk of a spread. And then NFPA 855 governs the installation and how these systems work in practice.
Awesome, yeah, thanks for that. The other piece too, I know we talked a little bit about how we evaluate local resources and infrastructure. So one of the pieces that we do suggest is evaluating your water supply needs as part of the process. I think that's just a smart thing to do to make sure that it fits in with your local needs. And you want to use the state guidance on the public health, safety, and environmental impacts of battery storage to shape your permit conditions and monitoring requirements. and bringing in both fire, health, emergency management, and inspection officials into the process early, not after the siting process is already and strategy is already set. You know, you've seen some communities bring in fire departments a little later. You know, now that the new regulations have not necessarily been, you know, going this whole year, right? So some of the things that we've seen some communities do is bring the fire department in late, and that hasn't been super helpful because those are often considered some of the experts that your community will want to hear from. And so making sure that the fire department has all that they need in terms of information and questions answered can go a long way. And in terms of what you want to do, you want to make sure that you require project-specific emergency response plans, first responder training, and clear coordination with local, regional, mutual aid systems. So one of the pieces is that you might have certain towns where you work together with fire departments to give mutual aid, and you want to make sure that all of those fire departments have similar training. If you're going to be responding to a potential fire, you want to make sure that everybody has the same information, and mutual aid is one of those considerations to think of with the fire departments. And you want to think about safety as both a siting issue and an operational issue, including risk, fire suppression, planning, access, as well as for emergency response and long-term monitoring.
The other thing I'll mention here is, like, you'll see evaluate firefighter training needs, and I want to highlight that because the next item we're going to talk about is benefits and environmental justice. So resources for training local firefighters can and should be negotiated as part of a community benefits plan, which we'll talk about in a second. But just kind of like a high level, I think many communities that we've talked to were kind of a little surprised to learn that aside from like sort of the tax revenues, which is sort of the obvious benefit, there are other ways that communities can directly benefit from hosting clean energy projects. And so I included here, what you'll see is like headlines from 4 different towns across Massachusetts that have organized to ensure that the battery projects located in their town generate added benefits. So you can see here, the top one is a host community agreement from the town of Medway, where they negotiated money for additional emergency response training, money to improve local sidewalks and for energy and sustainability projects. You also have some examples from Holden and Wakefield. The Wakefield example, developer donated about 10K to the local Boys and Girls Club. So just like an example of the realm of the universe that exists here in Massachusetts in terms of how communities can negotiate to make sure that benefits flow to their towns. So one of the major vehicles that towns can use to benefit, to kind of deliver some of these benefits, is something called a community benefits plan. It's basically a roadmap outlining how the developer is going to collaborate with local environmental groups or other stakeholders to ensure that those benefits arrive in town. When we think about some of the sort of other common questions related to benefits here, another common question we get is like, what can communities include in a CBP or a community benefits plan? The answer is, based on some of the examples you can see here, it really varies quite a lot and is a really subjective part. I'll say the new siting and permitting regulations do not require a CBP to be executed, but they do require developers to consider it as part of their project application. So again, something to think about when you have a project proposal in front of you is, what does the community benefits negotiation look like in your town? Who are they talking to? What are the stakeholders involved? And what are the items being considered? In general, the items to negotiate a CBP are things that would directly achieve town goals. They do not have to necessarily be tied to the project itself, although sometimes they can be. And I would say as well, it's a delicate balancing act of ensuring that the benefits are significant and meaningful enough to advance priorities, but also not so expensive that it'll make, if the project was approved, it would be so expensive that it would drive up electric rates. That's basically what I'm trying to get into. And when in doubt, the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity has a guidebook online. I can share the link afterwards that kind of outlines the structure, negotiation process, and kind of examples of things to include in CBPs. But I wanted to highlight that.
Awesome. So when you think about the benefits for EJ communities, this table outlines different ways to approach community benefits, both with a community benefit plan, a community benefit agreement, or even a host community agreement. So this has some ideas for how to support meaningful participation and community engagement. Some of the ways that you can do that, like we talked about, was funding for community projects, as well as identifying liaisons. You could also require translation services if you have populations where English is not their first language. You can require technical assistance, fire capacity training, consider traffic and noise impacts and ways to mitigate that. You can think about resilient investments and other tools that help residents engage on equal footing as part of that community benefits agreement. And you want to make sure to tie those community benefits directly to project impacts with clear funding amounts, timelines, reporting requirements, and named responsible parties, so there's no confusion along the way. You want to prioritize tangible benefits of things that people can see and feel for environmental justice neighborhoods closest to the project, consistent with Massachusetts' focus on cumulative impacts and community burden that was talked about earlier. And another example to take a look at is Salem actually had a really strong community benefits agreement up there. I think it actually included childcare. So there's different things that can be included to make sure that everyone in the community is able to participate fully in the community engagement that the developer is leading.
And one other thing to just add on this slide is just be very thoughtful as well in sort of the vehicle that's being considered. So I've included kind of the three most common types here in terms of community benefits plan, a community benefits plan, which is a required thing to consider as part of the new siting and permitting process, but it's important to note it is not legally enforceable. This can be a precursor to what's called a community benefit agreement, which it's confusing because they all sound basically the same. But CBA is legally binding. So it would add, takes a little longer to actually negotiate, but again, that's a critical tool. And then more commonly are host community agreements, which can incorporate the terms of a CBP or CBA. So just being cognizant of the vehicle there, previously. And then fourth dimension is project labor agreements. So project PLAs or project labor agreements are effectively pre-hire agreements between a project proponent and a labor union that dictates wages, benefits, and other rules for the construction of a project. It can be tailored to advance economic justice and require investment in local workforce training, local worker hiring, as well as apprenticeship programs and just other career pathways for underrepresented groups or folks in your town. And importantly, it's important to note a PLA is a negotiation between a union and the developer, not the town. However, again, because this can be included in a CDP or a host community agreement, you as the official looking and reviewing the permit can consider local hiring or PLAs as part of a host community agreement and encourage that if local workforce hiring is a priority for you. One of the more common questions we get about PLAs is, do they increase costs? This is a source of debate, and I think this debate arises anytime that you talk about increasing wages, because what's good for employees is not always good for the employer. That said, there are several studies from in particular some project labor agreements in Illinois that illustrated they did not raise overall project costs, and they can in fact increase bid competition by expanding the pool of local workers to compete. But ultimately the answer to that question is context dependent and project specific. But I will say this, my opinion as Erin, not as an ELM representative. I tend to think that the economy does well when more people are getting paid. So I would just throw that out there as my own opinion, not ELM. Okay, I'll go.
Awesome. So one piece, we have seen project labor agreements help projects that the community writ large wants to go through the process a lot easier, because when there's union workers in town who are going to benefit from that project, they will be a support to help with community engagement as well and education. And it's just one of the project level tools to set labor standards upfront. So the 2024 Climate Act creates a procurement preference for labor agreements. So the first step that you all can do is actually to reach out to Anina at Climate Jobs Massachusetts. Her email is there, and she can connect you with your local building trades council, because that would be the easiest way. And she's happy to field all of your questions and get you connected if you want to identify who your representative is. We use PLAs, or PLAs are used rather, to set wage standards, safety requirements, dispute resolution, apprenticeship access, and workforce equity expectation for battery storage construction. And as I mentioned, there's been a number of projects that have used PLAs, battery storage projects in Massachusetts, including Everett, Somerset, and Revere, and that seems to be an emerging practice for battery storage that we're seeing just in the past year. And you can require applicants to explain how labor plans address prevailing wage, battery-specific safety training, and pathways for local workers, as well as for women and workers from environmental justice communities. You can also encourage partnerships with unions, apprenticeship programs, vocational schools, and regional workforce boards, so host communities can see the real benefits in their workforce development. Awesome. So in terms of community engagement, this is the fifth dimension, and these are some of the questions that we've heard in terms in our community engagement work. The first is, am I supposed to be leading the community engagement process for battery storage projects? No, you're not. You're not leading it. The developer is, but you are making sure to support them along the way and make sure that everybody has the information they need to engage. The second question, what role does the developer play? Well, that's all outlined in the regulations, and you can take a look there to see what those are in more detail. The third question is, how can we work together to make sure the process is fair, aligned to regulation, and fits the needs of this community? And I think that's the main piece, right, is making sure that it is aligned to the regulations, but also that it meets your specific community's context. No community is exactly the same. Everybody has different bylaws as well as specific contexts in terms of infrastructure. And so having communication and collaboration along the way just makes the process go a lot smoother. And then the final question, what do I do if things aren't going well? And I think the setting and permitting regulations go into great detail on that. So when we look at the town planner's role in community engagement, the biggest piece is you don't have to lead the engagement, but it's helpful if you can help bring the parties together to make sure it's effective. So town planners can set clear expectations for developer outreach early, coordinate communication between town departments, help identify key local stakeholders and community groups, encourage multiple opportunities for residents to learn and ask questions, ensure information is accessible and easy to understand, and keep the permitting process both transparent and predictable. And it's important to note here that the local government representative that Stephen talked earlier about, that's the chief administrative officer for the project. And the town planner can be a part of that, but it's not a given that it's just going to be the town planner. It can also be the mayor, town manager, members of the select board, and it can be also broken up by responsibility of the different aspects of the regulations themselves. The municipal planner is just one of several officials DOER suggests as the community to consider for that LGR. And in terms of pre-filing, so an example would be the planning board chair could maybe serve as the LGR for site suitability and mitigation, and then you could identify other people for the other aspects of the process. All right. So in terms of community engagement, when we think about what that means, we want it to lead to better processes for citing the project. It doesn't mean that the project gets approved every single time. It means that there is education and accountability along the way, and that you maintain or even strengthen public trust in the process, regardless of the final permitting decision. Coordination of the formal review belongs to that LGR. And the LGR compiles and issues the permits, the final permit. And regardless of what your role is if you're the LGR or you're one aspect of that, you can obviously still support strong community engagement along the way and help different departments in town communicate and make sure that the pieces are falling into places they should. Oh, sorry. When we think about community engagement, the LGR should be ensuring strong coordination and communication to enable meaningful community engagement. And these are just some of the pieces of community engagement, depending on the stage of the process that the LGR should be overseeing. So what makes a project successful? Success is not simply whether it's approved or denied. It's whether the process is organized, collaborative across different departments, transparent and accessible to the community, focused on public safety at the earliest stages, consistent with state and local requirements, it's fair, it's predictable, and completed within the required timelines as is possible. So ultimately, a successful process is one where residents understand how the decisions are being made. There's local expertise that informs those decisions, and the community has confidence that the project has received a thorough and fair review. All right, so in terms of what the planner's role is, the planner's role is to coordinate the review, explain the process, and bring departments together and help residents participate. In terms of what the developer does, the developer completes the required outreach, documented meetings, summarizes the feedback, and explains the project's changes, and then addresses any remaining gaps. So the other piece is when you're thinking about what makes a good partnership, there are some green flags. And there's a guide that we included as well in an appendix that has more of these. But just really making sure that the right people are in the conversation early. So you'll see that the process, the community engagement process itself will start early. It'll be transparent. There'll be a two-way dialogue. You'll reach affected residents and explain changes and then follow through.
So just wanted to leave this sort of couple of top line takeaways, which is that grid-scale battery storage are important tools for reducing costs, increasing affordability, and getting more out of our renewable energy resources. I think with smart planning, siting, and community engagement, these projects can benefit communities in many ways. And again, like Trina was saying, a successful process isn't one without disagreement. It's just one that is transparent, coordinated, and ultimately just make sure that we hear all voices. And with that, we can turn it over to time for Q&A. I saw your hand first. Yeah.
One of the slides showed a graph where the incidences of fires went way down as the projects went way up.
Yep.
Those solar panel or storage?
Those were, sorry, battery storage. Yep.
They were battery storage.
Yes. Yep, of course.
So my understanding is that non-combustive thermal runaway is much more dangerous than an actual fire. And I'm curious if ELM or anyone else has a siting recommendations or public safety recommendations on how to control a non-combustive thermal runaway and the fallout from that.
In terms of, so, yes.
So there's no fire.
Yeah.
But the cells are in thermal runaway and are off-gassing through the container.
Right.
And so they're all of the nasty chemicals that get created when that cell releases and meets oxygen go into the air. And I know that they're lighter than air to start, but as they cool, they create dust of sorts that settles.
Sure.
If these are in highly populated areas or near or adjacent to environmentally sensitive areas, that fallout can have impacts on groundwater, public drinking water wells, schools, humans who are outside, animals who are outside. Is there siting considerations or a guide to siting considerations for communities to use?
First, yes. And I would think, again, we would point to the DOER model bylaw on battery storage that I think just debuted. We weighed in while that was being formulated, which has particular guidelines on, for example, like whether places over an aquifer or drinking water source or just other environmentally sensitive area. But I think, again, in that case, these systems are built in accordance with some safety standards that require sensors that detect abnormalities in the operation of the battery itself. So again, like early detection is what's key here. And again, recognize that it's non-combustible, but these sensors do more than just sort of detect smoke. Like there's ways to understand like how the battery's sort of like performing. Again, when there's an abnormality like that, the battery is going to like have some variation in its performance, but also to detect some other like hazardous emissions, for example. So again, that early detection is what enables an emergency first responder to get there in time to manage the system before a thermal runaway event happens again. So like that's the first, I guess, part of it. Making sure that you have an emergency response plan in place with the fire system, and then they know what kind of chemistry is involved and have a protocol for responding in the event of something like that when they get, for example, the sensor goes off and they get a call. Those are the two immediate guidelines or immediate sort of reactions. But again, I think the model bylaw has some really good content in terms of like appropriate siting within the context of whether it's located to environmentally sensitive areas, whether it's close to population centers and things like that. Again, I think in a lot of towns, like it would be zoned for like industrial use. It's probably the most appropriate. But again, I think it would be context dependent every town to town. So I think
No, it's okay. I'm not going to, I'll let other people ask questions.
No, happy to follow up, but yeah.
Actually, it's to follow up on his question. I work for the town of Hudson, and we are probably going to be doing a battery energy storage system in an industrial zone land in partnership with our local utility company. We have a local electric company. And as the planning director brought in the public safety officials early in this process, nothing has been filed or anything like that, to kind of get their perspective on the things that they're gonna need in order to feel comfortable moving forward. So all of this should be done before you're bringing the public into the process. And from what I understood from the presentation from the company Lightshift, I think they did the one in Holden.
Yep, they did.
The new technology has better suppression systems to contain the thermal runaways into like these battery storage units or in like trays. Like it looks like a cafeteria in a way when you open up like a cabinet. And the suppression system basically keeps the thermal runaway just in that particular tray and minimizes and sometimes eliminates the off-gassing that could occur. I'm not saying that it doesn't occur. And from what our public safety officials said, we're not going near it because there's really nothing, you can't use water or anything like that, but the technology has advanced so much that there's a lot more safety measures in place for these thermal runaways. But I agree, it should be an industrial zoned parcel is a perfect place. Yeah. And it's not a warehouse, guys. Like nobody wants warehouses anymore. Here is something that's not generating truck traffic.
Yes, I think you're referencing mostly. But yeah, no, I think a lot of the safety standards in that NFPA 855 include kind of what you described, where it's sort of like this modular design that governs sort of sizing and spacing.
Exactly.
To contain it to just one cell if there's a failure. Any other questions?
Are committee or any of those sort of to your warehouse point, are they co-located with other uses, or are they strictly sort of just spatially constrained by needing to be by themselves? Like, could you conceivably have a warehouse or other sort of facility at the same site?
You could have it at the same site. Again, it's the sort of like co-location is more dependent. Like you wouldn't want the battery to probably be in that warehouse. That was the sort of case that happened out in Moss Landing out in California, where they were all contained, and then it just created this huge sort of containment of all these gases that became a much bigger disaster than it needed to be. These systems can be like located near other systems.
Commercial parking lots are their new favorite thing. Because they turn them in, they're UL containers, they look at the back of the tractor trailer, and they just kind of stick them in a corner. So I guess my follow-up to my question earlier was, with the Duxbury decision and the inclusion of BESS under section 3 of 40A, they're falling more into the solar, where we locally can regulate them by special permit as long as we don't prohibit them. And I know you're not an attorney, so I don't, this is probably more of a town council question, but if we have limited industrial land and we're limiting BESS systems to industrial land, are we violating what the state is doing section 3 of 40A?
Yeah, that's a great question that I am not equipped to answer because, like you said, I'm not an attorney, but I know the.
Don't have the courts. You know?
Yeah.
And a reasonable amount of land for, you know, a protected use like solar is somewhere between 2% and 100%. So it's like, we don't know.
You mentioned that if you have a substation in your town, that's a potentially good location because there's no cost of a transmission line or very little cost. So that raises the question, if I have a substation in my town, how likely am I to get a BESS proposal?
That's a great question, and it depends on the hosting capacity of that particular substation. Some substations are used to their full capacity and they don't have room to inject any more energy without grid upgrades. So I know Eversource and National Grid have hosting capacity maps. I don't believe that this is a requirement for all of the like local municipal like plants across the state, but it's And even getting the maps from them was kind of a headache, so I'm glad that we have the maps now to see at least in their footprints where some of the hosting capacity is. So longer answer to your question is it depends.
That way would be a good example to look at because they have a substation, they zoned an energy resource district around it, expecting that there would be development there. And so they have a 500 megawatt hour system that I think just came online in the last few months that is cited there. And there's another one that's going.
But that's a good point, is it could be.
Yes, and you know, and you can look at, you know, Eversource and Grid, they do have like a list of like when do they expect individual ones might be overloaded. There's specific like studies they're doing for like, okay, we know this substation is reaching capacity, we want to expand it. Sometimes there's a substation upgrade that comes with the battery project, depending on the scale of the decision. There's a lot of factors.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it's probably safe to say the majority of the battery projects you're going to see in your community are going to be accessory use to, you know, well, depending on how much like commercial buildings and such, but like we see a lot more smaller projects that are associated with an individual like commercial building or a school or something like that, where it's behind the meter and you're trying to help manage that facility's individual energy usage. Again, it's like, you know, there are photos in Steven's presentation, there are across some, you know, I think dozens of smaller projects like that across the Commonwealth where it's like, you know, there's one extra trailer in the parking lot of the high school that's helping reduce the school's energy bills by, you know, 40,000 a year.
In terms of long-term planning for growth, and somebody answered the question about will battery energy storage systems that are designed to resupply energy that they've stored, does it have an impact, presumably negative, on the potential load or the draw that a new development might have? In other words, if you've been extremely successful at siting energy storage systems, what's that development's impact on future development that would be a load or a draw on the grid?
That's a great question, and it depends. The utilities are trying to and I say the utilities, I largely mean Eversource and National Grid because I live in that footprint and they are required to conduct.
GPU's making them figure it out.
The Department of Energy is requiring them to do forward-looking planning of where they see load growth anticipated and develop a plan for incorporating more clean energy onto the grid to meet that forecasted load. I've not taken a look at it's called the ESMPs, the Electric Sector Modernization Plans. I've not taken a look at those in quite a while. They're very long and dry, and they're required to update them every few years. But those plans exist in those utility footprints. But I think that's honestly the question that I think all of us are struggling with, is we see load coming, increasing, I should say. We see the need for more clean energy. Where's that going to be sited? Where's the demand going to be occurring? How does that impact grid constraints and energy affordability when there's bottlenecks and insufficient capacity to get energy to those grids to go? So long-rambly answer to your question is that's the $1 million question.
There's also a flip side to it, right? Which is that like, if you have, I don't know, let's compare, you know, 10 megawatts of solar, 10 megawatts of battery plus that solar, 10 megawatt power draw from the data center, right? It's like each of those have a very different profile. And right now, you know, under like sort of historical practices, they're being, you know, they're often being treated like similar ways in terms of how much of like the interconnection capacity that they're taking up. And so one of the things that's being worked on is like flexible interconnection, which is like, okay, if you're pairing that solar with storage, how are enabling it to store energy or curtail things, you know, what does that free up in terms of the grid capacity? And can you interconnect it at a lower, taking lower capacity? So that's something that there's regulatory processes around how best to do that and how best to manage those, because, you know, storage lets you, instead of, you know, on the sunniest day of the year, every solar plant is injecting right at this time, reduce the amount of power that's going onto the grid and like inject it at a different time. So it's like there's new complexity that's being added by the flexibility that's offered by storage that, you know, perhaps unsurprisingly, you know, regulatory apparatus is like, just trying to catch up.
Yeah, but I will say in general, the ability to reduce that peak load, that graph I included. So the way we build our system is we build for the peak. So we have to make sure we build up enough energy to meet energy on the hottest day or the coldest day. But we don't have that load all the time, but it's very expensive to build that incremental unit. And so anything that we do to kind of shade that peak reduces the amount of expensive generators we have to build. And so in general, like reducing energy consumption, which is kind of enabled through some of the characteristics of renewables and storage, does save energy in the long run, but it does.
One of you slides discussed noise. What's the noise associated about noise barriers and,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you have different uses, like, we didn't realize that, a pickleball court is extremely loud. It become extremely controversial. So,
Yeah, I mean,
what we thought was a good thing, as this turned out to be a nightmare.
I think it depends on the size, but I visited several battery storage projects that are already running in Massachusetts, and it's barely recognizable when you're standing like 10 feet away. When you get real close, if it's a very hot day, what you'll hear are the fans.
It's the cooling units?
Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly, which is not that unit different from many different technologies that are already in existence with the cooling.
And I think DEP has a noise ordinance that requires adherence to, I think it's 40 to 50 decibels or something in that range.
It's a guideline.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. They just updated it. I think the variation.
Noise is only a guideline, by the way.
Yeah, but it's come up in town meetings, and just there are noise barriers that you can put up that can kind of.
Many other things are much louder than battery storage that are cited.
Also very common in condition to require building some sort of acoustic fencing. I think that this project has about 14-foot fence around it.
Yeah, so I'm glad someone mentioned cooling, because I've been wondering about what you've seen in terms of that and what types of cooling and whether there's any other utility demands that these facilities have.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer in terms of the incremental energy demand of the cooling systems. I know they all do have to have the cooling systems. Again, part of like the safety statements to like maintain the safety and like secure operation of these systems requires that. But besides that, that's a good question. I'll get back to you.
It's usually, I think it's like somewhere like 1 to 3% range of like the size of the battery, in terms of like parasitic loads from the cooling. Whatever like the capacity that this batteries are stored. Various stuff.
I don't see any more hands unless there's one last thing or question, but with that we can call it a day. Thanks everyone.
Anybody have any more questions before we wrap it up?
Will you be sending the slideshows?
Yeah, I'll send the slideshows and I'll send the,
Thank you.
everybody, are heading over barrels and lines, KK social. Just down, Mason Street, easy walk.